Bibles to the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13. Maybe you've heard it called that before. Here in this text, Paul defines the essence of Christian love. We're in this message series called The Marriage Covenant. We began by talking about what is the marriage covenant by nature, and that was rooted in Genesis chapter 2. And God brings Eve to Adam and declares, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And that's the marriage covenant. It's a sacred union between a man and a woman, devoted for a lifetime to a journey of love and grace and faith together. That's the essence of it. There's nothing more beautiful that God has established on this earth than the husband-wife relationship. And we talked about the last couple of weeks, though, the needs of husbands in the marriage and needs of wives, and we talked about how we go about meeting those needs. Remember, we looked at Ephesians chapter 5, and we talked about the aspect of respect and submission. We talked about sacrifice on the part of the husband. Today what I want to do is I want us to go a little deeper in this idea of love, because I want us to leave this message series being crystal clear on the way the Bible defines love, because there's so many misconceptions about that word. And I want to start off by sharing with you a survey that was done recently of some children who were asked about love. Maybe you've seen this before. They were asked about love and what it meant, and the eyes of kids who are kind of looking at the adult world and seeing what adults do and how they behave, and then in response, their ideas about love. So here, this was 8 and 9-year-olds. The first question was this: how do people in love typically behave? Wendy said this: well, when a person gets kissed for the first time, they fall down, they don't get up for at least an hour. That's what she said. Then they were asked the question, why does love happen between two people? Well, Andrew said, well, one of the people has freckles, so he finds somebody else who has freckles too, and they get together. May said this: no one is really sure why love happens, but I heard it has something to do with how you smell, and that's why perfume and deodorant are so popular. And then there was Manuel. He said this: I think you're supposed to get shot with an arrow or something, but the rest of it isn't supposed to be so painful. And then they were asked, what do you think falling in love is really like? John said this: it's like an avalanche, and you ought to run for your life. And then Glenn said this. Notice these are boys talking, right? Glenn said this: if falling in love is anything like learning how to spell, I do not want to do it. It takes too long. So many misconceptions about love, and from the lips of children, you hear what these misconceptions look like. And what we want to talk about today is the covenant work. The covenant work. The rolling up the sleeves and the getting dirty and the daily grind of making that covenant work. In essence, it's by understanding first and then acting upon the idea of what true love is all about. So let's read in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning in verse 1. Now remember, the Apostle Paul here is speaking to a church primarily, and he's not talking about love in a Christian marriage per se. He's talking about the general idea of love, but he epitomizes love because this church is a church that's having trouble understanding it. It's a church divided. It's a church where people don't get along. And it's a church where they have made other things priorities. So this is what he says. Verse 1, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres, love never fails. How relevant, how applicable for us today in a world that's got so many upside-down conceptions about this ideal. How important it is for us to understand the nature of true Christian love. And so we're going to see three things here. Three characteristics of Christian love. The first one is this. Paul says that love, as God designed, is supreme. Is supreme. And he goes in this passage to talk about spiritual gifts, certain things that the church had prioritized in the church, certain attitudes, certain ways of expressing pride that had kind of pushed out love. And to me, there's something about that in itself, and that is love kind of leaks, doesn't it? Love kind of gets pushed aside. And so the myth in our culture, in today's world, where God would say love is supreme, I think our world might say, well, love is optional. And I mean optional in the sense of dispensable. That can be done away with. But the supreme human virtue endowed from the Creator to us is love. And so the question goes, how are we doing on that? How are we working toward it? How is that the center of our lives? Remember when the religious leader came to Jesus and he said to Jesus, Jesus, tell me, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus didn't miss a beat. He said, the greatest commandment is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And the second is like it: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus was saying that life is ultimately defined by love. It is supreme. And yet it's something that leaks. There's all kinds of things in our lives, in our worlds, in our marriages that causes love to kind of go away and disappear and fade and to be drained. Familiarity, I think. We tend to take for granted those with whom we're familiar. We get used to people. And rather than valuing them, we tend to now expect them to meet needs in our lives. And love kind of just drifts away with those people in our lives with whom we're familiar. We forget the blessing that they are. The pressures of life and financial stress and jobs and work, that's kind of the trajectory of life is away from love. It's a subtle and slow drift. So many things in this world can cause us to lose love at the center of our lives. And yet the Apostle Paul is saying, listen, it is supreme. It is not optional. And you look at how he characterizes it. It's amazing to me because he talks about speaking in tongues. This was what was going on in this Corinthian church. They were abusing the spiritual gift, and Paul goes on to explain how they were abusing that spiritual gift, but they were prioritizing it above issues and virtues of love. Other things such as prophecy, such as understanding all knowledge, the idea that people who have knowledge are more important. But Paul says, listen, if I have all knowledge and I have all faith and I have the ability to speak eloquently, but I don't have love, he says, I'm nothing. He talks about those who would even sacrifice themselves, those who would do noble things. He says, if I deliver my body to be burned, if I give all my possessions to the poor, but I don't do it in the motivation of love, he says it matters not. Wow. It's the heart. It's the motivation of love that is supreme. Paul was stating, listen, you can sacrifice in love, and love is rooted in sacrifice, but there is a way of sacrificing even without love. And he's basically describing three categories. He's saying, no matter what I say, tongues, eloquent speech, no matter what I believe, having knowledge and faith, and no matter what I do, what I say, what I believe, what I do, if it is not motivated and driven by love, he says it is nothing. It is the supreme motivation. It's not optional. That's what Paul was saying. It's not optional. God demands it, but more than that, God knows that it's love within our lives that ultimately fulfills. So again, it comes back to the question, how you doing with love nowadays? Is it becoming second place? Secondly, the second characteristic of Christian love is that it's a choice. It's a choice. In verses 3 through 6, Paul talks about that choice to love. In other words, he's describing here the fact that it's an act of the will. Now, this defies the cultural myth in our world that love is primarily an emotion. It's something that you feel. It's something that you fall into. Like falling in a hole, you know. The problem with it, if you fall into love, you can fall out of love. Love can be fleeting when it's based upon emotions. And those who are mature as human beings understand that you can't lead and live your life from emotions because emotions are so unpredictable, aren't they? I didn't feel like getting up this morning. And had I let that feeling rule my life, I wouldn't be here right now. But I knew that I needed to get up, that it was the right thing to do to get up, and so what did I do? I got up, not because I felt like it. And so what should rule our lives are our decisions, not our emotions. The same is true with love. If we love others only when we feel like it, we might find ourselves not loving much because it leaks. It's hard to come by. People don't often respond as we think they should. And so we should lead our lives. Those who are mature lead their lives not based upon feelings, not based upon emotions, but based upon decisions that are right and true. Someone once said, it's much better to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. Because it's hard to muster an emotion sometimes to do the right thing. But when I do the right thing, as God's Word would declare, when I make a mature choice, it's talking about growing up here, when I don't do what I feel like and not do what I don't feel like, instead what I do what is right, guess what happens? My emotions catch up. And I begin to feel good about my good decisions. So I didn't feel like getting up this morning. I got up. I got in the shower, started thinking about today, and guess what? I started feeling better about getting up. My feelings caught up with my right actions. This is the power of love. This is what happens. And it's true regardless of the response of the person that you're loving. It really is. That love has this amazing ability to provide power within our hearts when we do what is right and what is consistent with the ideal of biblical love. It's like a medicine for the soul that heals not only those that we give the medicine to, but it heals the one who gives it. It has an amazing ability to transform us when we choose to act as God would want us to. So it's a choice. It's not primarily an emotion. And then Paul outlines 11 things that describe this choice. And I was in student ministry for many years, and I would teach on this passage a lot because, you know, teenagers, they've got so many ideas about what love is. And, you know, it's 15-year-old girls, they love some guy, you know, and then 4 weeks later, they love this other guy. And, you know, it's back and forth, up and down, guys, you know, all kinds of crazy. I talk about this is what love looks like. And this is a template by which you can filter through aspects of love. If it doesn't match these things in God's Word, then it's really not love. It may be something else. It may be infatuation. It may be lust. But it's not love unless it's consistent with what God describes here. And so I would try to communicate that to these young people. I learned, the thing of puppy love. I learned that puppy love, though, is real to the puppy, right? And so going and now changing perceptions about what love is very hard to do because we've been conditioned a certain way. Certainly that was true with young people. It's also true for all of us. So let's look at this, okay? Let's look at these things real quickly. Paul says, first of all, and by the way, he states out 2 or 3 things in the affirmative, but he states also many more things, though, in the negative. And by default, what I think he's saying is, again, is if you compare what you're doing or not doing based upon these things, then you'll know whether you're loving someone or not. He says, first of all, love is patient. The ideal here is long-suffering. Long-suffering. Willing to endure. That's the essence of love. Kind. Just simple kind. I love that Paul included this. Just simple kindness. The ideal is courtesy. Love at heart is gentle and kind and courteous. Courtesy in the small things is the idea. Does not envy. Does not envy. Love is not characterized by jealousy and insecurity. Again, it's amazing how people will have things in their relationship that really don't match this. And I've talked to people so many times. I say, yeah, but I love him. But is your relationship characterized by this? And we go through, no. Well, you're feeling something, but I wouldn't say that what your relationship is a loving relationship. It's something to work toward, but it's not envious. It's not jealous. Next, he says, does not boast. The idea in the original language is not a windbag. That's the idea. So does not boast. And the next one is very similar to it. It is not proud. Puffed up is the idea. Pretense, acting as though you're special in some way. It is not rude, Paul says. Does nothing of which it would be ashamed of later. Does not treat harshly, but is not rude. It is not self-seeking. This goes to the heart of what agape love is all about, and that is the self-sacrificial nature of Christian love. It is not self-seeking. In other words, it does not demand its own way, is the idea. It is not easily angered, does not have a quick trigger, is not quick-tempered, does not blow its top easily, is not irritable. That's not love, Paul says. Keeps no record of wrongs. I really like this one. Keeps no record of wrongs. It's an accounting term. It's an accounting term, whereas the ideal here is somebody writing something down in the ledger that someone did that was wrong, in some way offended them. They write this thing down, they date it, they stamp it. Only months, years, maybe even later. Well, on July 17th, 1989, you did this. And now to use that as a way of getting something in return. Paul says love doesn't keep a record of wrongs. In other words, love has a bad memory. It forgets quickly. Does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It takes no pleasure in wrongdoing. Love does not lead another into sin. If you're leading another person into sin, you're not loving them. Does not delight in wrongdoing, is not glad about injustice, is not happy when evil triumphs. It takes no joy in hearing evil openly discussed. Love is never glad to hear bad news about another person. Love never says, well, they finally got what they deserved. Love is never happy to hear about another person who falls into sin. Love does not enjoy passing along bad news. These are the ideas behind this. And so these are choices, clear choices. Paul outlined it very clearly. Do you want to know what love is? Here's the picture. Now, on the flip side of this last phrase, he says, does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Love takes joy instead what is true, what is good, and what is honorable, and what is pure. That's what love does. It cheers whenever truth wins out. Love believes the very best. So love is supreme. Love is a choice. Then third, in verses 7 and 8, Paul says that love is unfailing. Love is unfailing. Look in verse 7 again. It says, love always protects. Notice the qualifier. Always protects. Love always trusts. Love always hopes, always perseveres. Love never, ever fails. And so the myth out there in our culture is that love is fleeting, that love is impermanent. The Apostle Paul says love never, ever fails. And you go, no, that's not right. I've seen people who, say they were in love, people who were married for 30, 40 years, and that marriage ended. That marriage ended in divorce. Love failed. Love didn't fail. People failed to love. When love is exercised, when it's given as the Bible exclaims, it always endures without fail. It's not fleeting. It doesn't come and go as our emotions do. It always lasts. Now, this is a difficult concept for us to get. It really is. And I'm not saying that glibly. It's tough for us to understand how we find the capacity within ourselves to give what Paul described. This is a pretty high bar, isn't it? You say amen to that? This is a high standard, right? It's tough to get to. Next week, we're going to go in detail about the source of love and the strength to find love to give to others. But to me, this is what it means. The essence of Christian love, and as I boil this down, my relationship with Tammy, it's really easy to love when she agrees with me. I'm a loving guy. We have love. Look at how loving we are. It's really easy to love when she does what I expect, as if I know everything that should be done and the way it should be done. It's really, really easy to love when needs are met as I think they should be. Christian love is a series of exchanges. This is the down and dirty stuff in marriage, and it's daily, isn't it? Because sometimes everything within you is like jump down the throat, wring the neck, yell at, that kind of thing. Those are the real moments of marriage, and maybe you don't have those and you live on another planet or something, but this is the way it is. I've been married for 24 years. And I've learned the hard way that it's about exchanges, nitty-gritty exchanges, where I will choose, listen, this is so important, where I will choose to take little exits away from my marriage, little decisions where I will move away from my wife rather than toward her. Little exits that I take, not to talk, not to discuss, not to prioritize, whatever it looks like. Little bitty things and these exchanges that are made when I don't feel like making them. When I don't want to. When I don't want to love is when I need to love. And it's what builds the relationship. Choices, step by step by step, little things where I'll move toward the marriage, where I will support the marriage, where I will build the marriage rather than subtly and maybe even passive-aggressively tear it down. But when I found that I do that by God's strength, love has an amazing transforming power where it makes me at peace with myself. It doesn't always guarantee the response that I hope for. But you know what? I walk away from that decision and that choice and I say, I think I did what I should have done. And not just that, but I did it in the attitude in which I should have done it. And in the motivation in which I should have done it. And I can be at peace with that. And in time, it changes the relationship. I can't change her. I can only change me. She can't change me as much as she wants to. She can only change herself. This is the way it works. And so mature, godly people come together, and when it's difficult, they make these choices, everyday choices, to make love supreme, to decide to love even when they don't feel it. And then ultimately to say, God, this is in response to you. And when I do, we're able to make that next step. It doesn't guarantee 5 years. It doesn't guarantee 10 years from now. But it guarantees the next moment in keeping my relationship with my wife. Love doesn't fail. When it's practiced, it doesn't fail. So I want you to think today about the choices that you make. Some of them you're conscious of. Those are not the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking about the small, daily, subtle choices you make to tear down your marriage, to tear down your spouse, and to walk away, though you'd never walk out the door, but to walk away from that covenant. Instead, could you say to your spouse, I want to choose me, but I choose us. I choose us. I want to show you a video clip as we end the sermon today that illustrates perfectly this idea that's contained here in Scripture. It's from the movie The Family Man. Maybe you've seen the movie. Through a series of events, this man is kind of thrown into a life that he never wanted. And he ultimately finds himself around that midlife time, to be doubting where his life ended up. He dreams of a world that he could have known had he not married this person and lived in this kind of messy house and walking the dogs and the kids jumping on the beds and all the things that go along, those daily things that go along with being a family man. And the idea that maybe life could have somehow turned out differently. And his wife is going to speak some words to him that are transforming. I hope that you'll enjoy it.
When you got on that plane, I was sure it was over. I left the airport afraid I'd never see you again. And then you showed up the very next day. That was a good surprise. I think about the decision you made. Maybe I was being naive, but I believed that we would grow old together in this house. That we'd spend holidays here and have our grandchildren come visit us here. I had this image of us, all gray and wrinkly, and me working in the garden and you repainting the deck. But things change. If you need this, Jack, if you really need this, I will take these kids from a life they love, and I'll take myself from the only home we've ever shared together, and I'll move wherever you need to go. I'll do that because I love you. I love you, and that's more important to me than our address. I choose us.
I choose us. That's the choice. I choose me, or I choose us. You know, she said, I'll do this because I love you. I'll do it. May God give us the strength to make loving choices, not because we feel like it, but because they're right. Let's stand for closing prayer.